moving on with the first round of the French presidential elections now behind us. Here to discuss the issues and the next steps for Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, we have Professor David Engels from the Institute for Western Affairs. Hello, and thank you for joining us on World Today.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Now, also joining us by Skype, we have journalist Marcin Gielczak. Well, we should be getting him sometime soon. Oh, there he is. Hello, and welcome to World Today.
Having me. Good evening.
Good evening. Now I wanted to put this up. These were the exit polls from after 8 o'clock, 8:10, I believe. If we can get that on the screen. Emmanuel Macron comes in with 28.1% of the votes in this first round of presidential elections, and Marine Le Pen with 23.3%. That means the two will face off in the next round of elections on April 24th. In the meantime, Jean-Luc Mélenchon with 20%, Eric Zemmour with 7.2%, Valérie Pécresse with 5%, Yannick Jadot with 4.4%, Fabien Roussel 2.7%, and Anne Hidalgo with 2.1%. Now, gentlemen, with these numbers coming in the way they are, what conclusions can we draw? Can we see into the future in April 24th as to who the victory will go to? And Professor, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, well, at face value, you could just think that we are once again in the same procedure as in nearly every French election for years and years, meaning that in the second election or the second round of election, you then have the showdown finally between the candidate of the system and somehow of the populist opposition. And once again, the odds are, of course, very high that once again Macron will probably also make it into a second term of president. Nevertheless, what is really astonishing this time is the enormously high number of people voting for political parties or candidates which are very clearly opposed, not only to Macron, but also to the entire European Union and globalization system, because we do not only have these 23-something% for Marine Le Pen, but of course also the vote for Mélenchon, which is 20% and something. Mélenchon, which is on the radical left side and also very strongly opposed to the European Union in its present state. And of course also the votes by Eric Zemmour. So we finally have more than 52% of people who are radically dissatisfied with Macron. Of course, Mélenchon has just also called his supporters to vote for Macron and again Le Pen, but of course we will see if these people will also really obey this advice or if they will rather identify themselves with the Front National, which is, as we all know, considered by now as being one of the most important leftist parties in France, given its social preoccupations.
Policies, yeah, right. Okay, so now, Marcin, do you concur with that? Do you have a similar take? What do you think that these numbers mean for this second round of elections? Do you think Macron will be re-elected as president?
Quite possibly, as the French say, plus ça change. Quite a lot of things have to change so that everything would remain exactly as it is. We have seen on the right the rise of Eric Zemmour. A lot of people believe that he has a chance to capture both Marine Le Pen's electorate and also at least a portion of the Republicans, the center-right party, a portion of their electorate. That hasn't happened. He has been badly damaged by his pro-Russian stance, whereas Madame Le Pen was smart enough and agile enough to distance herself from the Russian Federation. And on the left, we have seen a proliferation of candidates, and who knew what that would bring about. And at the end of the day, we have the same thing that we have had 5 years ago, which is Jean-Luc Mélenchon, a candidate of the far left, being the standard bearer of the left. Now, all of that leads us to the conclusion that the two traditional parties of power, the two parties around which rivalry the whole French political scene was arranged for the last 50 years are basically bankrupt, morally, politically, and the socialists will probably be soon bankrupt financially because they have enormous debts and because their candidate has received less than 5% of the vote, they will not get a reimbursement. So right now, the political center, be it the center left or the center right, doesn't really have a choice. They have to go with Macron. The real question is whom the mavericks, whom the protest voters will support. Well, from what we know from the polls, and the polls have been pretty accurate thus far, half of Mélenchon's voters won't vote at all, and the other half will be divided more or less equally between Macron and Madame Le Pen. And that means that it will be incredibly important what the center-right will do. Some of them will follow their leader, Valérie Pécresse, who has called upon her voters to support Macron. But there is a portion of the Republican vote, embodied, for example, by Mr. Rexity, who will never vote Macron.
Right now, with these results the way they are, does that signal that it's now no longer politically incorrect to vote for the right side of the political spectrum in France, Professor?
In France, there is definitely, or let's say France is definitely further down that way than many other Western European countries. So, of course, for years already, the presence of Le Pen and his, and then after her party, also made it possible to speak about many issues which, for example, in Germany can't even touched, even with great distance. Questions like mass migration, for example, are absolute taboo subjects in Germany, whereas in France now they have become mainstream. And I think this has also been accelerated thanks to the candidacy of Eric Zemmour. I once wondered when I met Marine Le Pen some month ago here in Warsaw at one of the meetings between the different conservative parties in the European Parliament, when she told us that she didn't really see Zemmour really as a competitor or as a danger, but rather also as a challenge and even as a positive possibility for her. And I think, even though I'm not really sure if she meant that outcome, we can really clearly see that the presence of two strongly conservative candidates at the same time has really moved the entire discourse a step further also to the right. And Zemmour's candidacy has, I think, brought with it a certain new thought in many urban intellectuals who up to that moment really thought that Le Pen and the Rassemblement National was really a party that was for the proletariat, for the simple people, for the uneducated, and thought a bit too high of themselves than to vote for the Rassemblement National. With Zemmour, this has changed. These people have become highly ideologized also and politicized on the right side of the spectrum. And so this could perhaps also be an asset now for the second round, because these people would probably not have voted for Le Pen 5 years ago. They may now, after having declared themselves so openly for Zemmour, that their limit in deciding for another candidate is also shrinking. So this is certainly an evolution that France and that France public opinion is moving strongly to the right, and this will also, of course, have a major impact one way or the other on the other European countries.
Part of the strategy of winning elections is actually getting your people out to vote and getting people mobilized and enthusiastic to actually show up to the polls on ballot day to get out their vote. Now, Marcin, what do you think? Who has better chances to put out more voters to get to the polls and vote for them? Would it be Le Pen? Would it be Macron?
Well, whoever wins will have a very weak mandate. I mean, a third of the people will vote for them, a third of the people will vote against them, and a third of the people won't vote at all. That's not really a mandate. I don't know what it is. That's hardly a boy date. I would suppose that both of them still have an ace up the sleeve, Macron will appeal to what is known as the Republican Front or the Republican Concentration, something that was originally introduced in order to prohibit the French Communist Party from winning elections, but ever since then it has worked against the Front National and currently against the Rassemblement National. We see how effective it will be in the second round. And Marine Le Pen has the sleeping giant, as many French commentators had called the young voters, the people between the ages of 18 and 24. A lot of them have stayed at home, and a lot of them are leaning either to the far left or to the far right. So she might tell them, look, this is as close as we're ever going to get when it comes to beating the establishment candidate, and if she can energize them, if she can mobilize them, then perhaps she has a standing chance of winning. Failing that, I suppose it will be a pretty easy Macron victory.
Now, staying silent on the issue of, staying largely silent on the issue of the Ukrainian war and relations with Russia, and highlighting the problems with the economy, the problems of rising prices and inflation. Will that work to Le Pen's advantage to win this election, do you think?
Yes, it does already. We shouldn't forget that France has always been turning quite a lot around itself, finally. So already from a French perspective, Germany and the other side of the Rhine is already a very foreign country, not to speak about Poland or even Russia or Ukraine. So this Ukrainian war is certainly present also in the media, but it is not something that touches the population immediately, or rather it touches the population indirectly through higher gas prices and these issues. So it is not necessarily to say an issue within the French public whether you stand for or against the Ukraine, but rather if you what you count to do when it comes to exploding prices. And so I think that Marine Le Pen, exactly also as Macron, of course, and many other candidates, are essentially targeting these social issues. And if you look at the preoccupations of the French people at the first level, we have the fear of diminishing pouvoir d'achat, of a diminishing possibility to buy things. 66% of French people are really anguished about losing finally their social status together with social protection and security. The war in Ukraine is somewhere around 20% of the interest of the voter. So I don't think that this will be a major part of the campaign. It's not about the war from a French perspective, it's rather about how to face it. And from that perspective, of course, we have to say that Marine Le Pen has managed very clearly to move her entire party to the left and to become the party that is the most associated with the little people finally, the people who do not manage to pay their gas prices and who do not know finally how to pay their rent, who are often also placed in the different provinces and who are cut off of many forms of supply. These people are fundamentally dissatisfied with Emmanuel Macron. These were also the people where the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, had been recruited. That is the voter potential of Marine Le Pen, and now she needs, of course, to activate these people so that they can go to the election. If you look at the opinion polls, both are extremely near to each other for the second round. So there are even some also opinion polls that are giving Le Pen slightly even before Macron. Of course, we know that every year or every 5 years, we know that the media play also with the risk of seeing eventually a Le Pen victory in order to mobilize people against her. But it has rarely been so tight, I would say, than it is this time, at least from today's perspective. Many things can change during the next 2 years, next two weeks, of course.
Right. So it's going to be an exciting election. It's going to be a neck and neck a neck-and-neck race, if you will.
I think that Macron has, of course, the better situation because he has the media for him. He has the whole establishment also at his favor. So I would not necessarily bet on Le Pen's victory. But I think we are nearer now to be perhaps surprised than at all the previous occasions.
Do you believe that Macron's stance on COVID-19 and with all the restrictions, is that still influencing how voters view Macron, and is that working to his advantage or disadvantage in this presidential election? Marcin.
I don't think that it plays that great of a role right now. Other issues have come to the forefront since then, including the war in Ukraine. I would only point out that President Macron has hardly been campaigning those past few weeks, and he even forbade his ministers from debating the other candidates, saying that, look, these are just politicians doing their electioneering, whereas I am a world leader. And he even once came to a rally and he told his supporters, I've just been on the phone with President Biden, and once we're done here, I'm on the phone with President Xi. That goes to show that he wants to place himself sort of above normal politics in a sort of royal-like, king-like position. But he may have he may be showing a bit of intuition here, because as Charles de Gaulle once said, "La France n'est pas la France sans la grandeur." France cannot be France without greatness. And here you see Macron sending troops to Estonia, sending troops to Romania. There are French jet fighter planes flying above Poland and Bulgaria and other countries. He has sent the only non-American nuclear aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, to the eastern Mediterranean. There's a lot of muscle flexing on his part, and he wants to show that he's this great world leader, and this election is only gay. Now, there is a portion of the electorate which will look upon him and they will say, well, yes, he's presidential. This is incidentally exactly the same thing that François Mitterrand had did in 1988. He basically refused to campaign, saying, look, I'm the president, the rest of them are just candidates. And one thing that Mitterrand had done in the 90s, he was the only world leader to visit Sarajevo during the war. Now, I'd be very surprised if Macron wouldn't use the opportunity between the first and the second round to go to Kyiv and shake Volodymyr Zelensky's hand.
Right. That's a very good point. Okay, gentlemen. Well, we have run out of time. My guest today were Professor David Engels here in the studio, and joining us via Skype, we had Marcin Gielczak. Thank you both for joining us today.